Oceans have always terrified me. Just the feeling of open water, not knowing how far below you something could be lurking in the depths, waiting to devour me with no rhyme or reason as to why, just the primal urge to feed. Figured getting away from Earth would solve that fear, especially considering Mars was mostly desert as far as the eyes could see. Bet you didn't know there's a whole terraforming colony up there already, did you? Yup, ever since the 90s when we sent the first small crew up, the world's governments have been steadily supplying scientists, builders, and equipment to Outpost Genesis. Work has been slow going, but we've seen a hell of a lot of progress over the couple of decades we've been up there. Hell, I've been doing 3-year on, 2-month off stints for the past 20 years, slowly helping to build up a survivable planet for my fellow humans. Honestly though, I love it here. Things are different, sure, and I'm not entirely used to missing some Earth commodities after all these years, but knowing we're up here for a real good reason is enough for me to look past all that. We've known for years now that the Earth wasn't going to be sustainable for life as we know it now, either due to climate issues or overpopulation eventually making things go batshit insane. Hell, up here we even have a running bet on exactly what's going to cause Earth to blink out of existence first. And most of us are pretty sure it's going to be human hubris and violence. As cruel as the Earth could be to us, humanity was always finding ways to be even more cruel to each other. Up here, though, I didn't have to worry about that. Meals were taken care of. I had friends to go out drinking with after we got done with the tasks of the day. Things were honestly pretty comfortable. Maybe 400 of us lived up here in total, everyone with their own job and duty to the outpost. I do geographic surveys picking out the best spots on the planet for new outpost resource stations, things like that. The best part is it pays well and I haven't had to spend a damn cent while I'm up here. So the account back home is bursting whenever I decide to retire. The sun came up and signaled a start to the day, waking me from a delightful dream to an awful, awful hangover. My head was pounding like someone was taking a jackhammer to the base of my skull. The last thing I want to do is take a research buggy out with 2 other surveyors. Work is work though, and there's no calling out for hangovers up here unless you really, really want to get in trouble. So against my will for the most part, I met up with Sandra and Sho in the transport bay to get on the metaphorical road. "You look like shit," Sho said, laughing at me as I walked into the locker room. He was already halfway into his pressure suit, making sure everything was locked in and secure before we entered the atmosphere of Mars. "What time did you end up tapping out?" "Probably around 1U, I asked, finding my way to the nearby sink so I could cold water on my face. It hit like a brick wall, waking me up much more. Puffed I was out of there by 11. Had my drinks, did my rounds, and my ass was in bed before midnight," he retorted. "Is Teller here yet?" Sandra said, busting into the locker room already suited up, a huge pack of supplies in her arms. Through the door into the transport garage, I could see our home for the day 1 of the mobile survey labs that were scattered throughout the outpost. It was like a small RV set up with seals, ventilation, and everything needed to do our jobs out in the harsh desert of the Red Planet. Morning was about all I could mumble back to her, dragging myself over to the locker containing my Atmos suit. I hated these things, even after all the years I've been using them, and it was like being put into a little cage. I went diving once in my life, and it felt like the same thing, knowing that only the helmet you're wearing is keeping you from a terrible fate of suffocation, whether it be under the seas or in the hot sands right outside. Told you, should have gone to bed earlier last night instead of hitting that last Jack and Coke. Sandra was laughing now as well, turning back with her bag of supplies to load up the research vehicle. All I could do was grumble my discontent as I crawled into the Atmos suit, hearing the pressurized hiss as the last seal snapped into place. Cho walked out to the vehicle before I could leave the room, telling me I had 5 minutes to finish sobering up. "What, they gonna give me a Martian, do I?" Shot back, grumpier now. Not sure why I was so irritable today, but something just felt more off than usual. I took a few minutes, but we all finally loaded into the survey RV, making our way west toward the newest survey site. We had a lot of luck in the past few weeks discovering areas that could possibly support life, with the right push of course, and things were looking pretty bright for the first time in years up here. Maybe that's why I felt so off. The feeling that something could go wrong when everything was going so inexplicably right lately. The drive was a nightmare, though. I know how the infrastructure on Mars is set up. It's not. Any expedition we took was traversing rough red sand and rocky terrain, with the huge wheels on the RV barely able to handle some of the more jagged chunks of rock that would spike up from nowhere under the sands. I swear the wheels on this thing would tear up a whole mountain back home. But here every little rock they ran over felt like someone stabbing a dagger into the back of my head. Maybe 3 hours later we finally reached our destination. I might have ended up asleep if I wasn't the one driving, but Sho and Sandra decided to do their pre-survey checks on our way there, so I was left with the short stick. When we arrived, I could see why we were being sent to study this place. In the midst of the red sands that were stretching around for miles, this single formation of rock stood waiting. It wasn't quite big enough to be a mountain, but as tall as a 5-story building maybe. It went up high enough that we would probably need the entire day just to climb up. Seriously? We have to get up there? I said, letting out an even bigger groan than when we took off. Nope, under it, Sho answered, heading past me out of the doors. I could see on closer inspection that there was a small opening at the base of the structure. Cave, entrance 4 wide enough for a small truck to pass through, was there, gaping open as if inviting us into the darkness beyond. Grab some flares and floodlights. We're going to take the buggy as far as we can. Pressed a button, loosing the small transport buggy we held in a small bay at the back of the survey RV. It rumbled out with a small hiss, the open cabin and bed in the back already piled with what we would need. Just in case, though, we grabbed a few more of the flares and high-powered lamps. If it was dark, we were going to at least be prepared. Even with all the light we were holding in reserve, it took a moment to gather courage once we reached the cave mouth. Everything beyond was pitch black, a complete absence of any kind of light source. We turned on the brights on the buggy. Those were barely able to penetrate past the first few meters. All we could tell was that the ground sloped downward hard almost immediately, meaning we had a descent in store. Ready, boys? Sandra asked, looking to Sho and I both before pulling one of the flares from a bag. Might be making a discovery that will change humanity's future, after all. Been hearing that for years, Sho mentioned. Sandra chuckled, handing each of us flares to keep in our belt. We set off, brights cutting through the darkness maybe 20 meters ahead, with the abyss running endlessly ahead of us. The rumbling of our wheels echoed off high walls, crunching over hard rock beneath us. As we got further in, the rocky sand of Mars' surface gave way to solid red stone. I found myself tapping the brakes more frequently as we went further down, the descent becoming steeper exponentially. Hey, think we're going to have to go on foot from here. Drop-off is getting too dangerous for the buggy, I said, slowing down enough to pull the emergency and set it in park. Never thought I would need a parking brake on Mars. We set off on foot, loading up flashlights and flares, along with a few small light markers to find our way back more easily. Not like the path was very non-linear, but when you're underground, it's easy to get disoriented. Our boots echoed loudly as we walked across the smooth, red rock, shining like a beautiful granite below us. It was so much more brilliant than the dull rock on the surface, almost mesmerizing in the swirling patterns set deep into the stone. Drip, drip, drip. All 3 of us stopped at the same time, the sound setting off billions of alarms in our minds that all pointed to that life-changing discovery water on fucking Mars. We all looked at each other, not even daring to believe we were the ones to find something like this. It was. We've been theorizing about this for decades, maybe centuries, but to be the ones that actually find it, we would be fucking gods back on Earth. No way, Sandra whispered. We're going to be loaded. Sho was giggling already. Don't get your hopes up just yet. Our luck, it's fucking oil or something, I mentioned. Oh, so you Americans will be up here in no time, Show laughed louder. We all kept moving forward, scanning the walls with bright flashlights, hoping to find the source of the drip. It took minutes of walking, the drip echoing louder through every step we took. Hey, it's in our constitution we're allowed, I retorted. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of that sweet, sweet oil money. Sandra chuckled as we walked on, still scanning when we noticed a faint glow coming from further down, bright blue tinted red against the stone encasing us. We didn't stop, but I know I held my breath for the next few meters before we entered the huge open cavern. Above us, a cavern of stars was spread out for miles, phosphorescent blues shining down from something on the stone roof. As we watched, the occasional drop would fall from them, landing atop the sprawling ocean split in front of us. The light reflected a deep red on the liquid surface below. A solid, shining pathway of rock divided the sea in front of us, glowing bright with the same bioluminescence. I pulled out a test tube from one of my belt compartments, moving to the edge of the liquid substance to take a sample. "Don't just stick your hand in," Sandra shouted. "I'm not an idiot," I mentioned, removing a small pair of tongs from another pocket. Gripping the tube tight enough to keep hold but loose enough not to shatter it, I made sure to go slow, dipping it down into the strange subterranean ocean. It took more force than I expected, the substance being much more viscous than expected. When I pulled the tube back up, it was dripping from the outside, slowly joining the echo of whatever was falling from the ceiling. I kept it, shaking it off before bagging and wrapping it to protect the sample. After it was safely sealed up, I shined my flashlight on it to get a clearer look. It was a deep crimson thick, and it looked like something was swirling around in it. Possible organisms in it. God, getting this under a microscope. We found something big, y'all. "Should we go ahead further?" Sho asked, walking to where the small pathway narrowed in, leading deep through the ocean cavern, a split in the Red Sea. He was shining his flashlight down the way, trying to see into the deep black punctuated by blue, glowing stars. There was no end in sight to the cavern, and the ceiling was so high the light's beam wouldn't even reach it, leaving the glowing stars above to their own devices. "Not yet. I want to come down here more prepared first," Sandra said, standing to put away a sample of the phosphorescent material. "Looks like a type of spore, but we need to have more light. Some flotation devices for safety. Getting this back to the folks at base is going to be huge." "Alright, so what? Mark it and head back to the rig. Or should we hit the gas back to base ASAP?" I asked, stepping away from the edge. There was something about it that was making me feel odd. The discovery was something to be proud of, and I was happy about it. But there was this nagging sense, that feeling that I shouldn't be here, that nobody should be here ever. Actually, I vote for hitting the base as fast as we can. I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting the creeps. "Same here," Sho replied. We packed it in, turning to leave. We were so focused on the sea in front of us that we didn't even think to look back at where the entrance. Now, noticing the walls around the small cavern opening. Dozens of etchings were in the cavern wall, stitched together in a bizarre series of shapes and drawings, making no comprehensible pattern from our perspective. Sho walked over, putting a hand up to one of the deeply carved lines in front of him. The smooth bores in the wall were finely crafted, put in with utmost care, so that doesn't happen naturally. I stammered out, approaching another section of the wall. Everything was immaculate. Compared to the rough, rocky surface above us, this was smooth, carved with passion by hands in reverence, or perhaps fear. That chill ran up my spine again as I stepped back, looking up to where the bizarre glyphs extended high to the cavern ceiling. There was no visible end, even with our high-powered lights, no telling what they became further up. "Alright, that's enough for today. Let's head back." The ascent back up was taxing, the incline much more steep than it seemed on the way down. The thought kept coming to my head that there was something back there, waiting for us to turn our backs on it so it could sneak closer, getting the jump on us. Every time I looked back, though, the empty cave greeted my eyes, with with nothing to show beyond a blanket of darkness. By the time we made it back to the buggy, we were all completely exhausted, panting hard in the stale air of our suits. We loaded in, hitting the reverse and relying on autopilot to get us out of there and back to the surface in about 30 minutes, with only minor bumps and scrapes from the narrow sections of the tunnel. The glaring light of the surface was intense, sun baking down to give us a reminder of how hot the surface was than down below. The RV was there, covered in red dust, as if it had been through a sandstorm. It took us a moment, but once everything was loaded in, we set off back to the base, samples in hand and eager to look closer once we returned. "Garage, we're coming in," I radioed once we began to get close. "Research vehicle returning, we've got some big news." "Teller, that you? Are Sho and Sandra there too? Where the fuck have you been?" Comms responded, almost screaming into the mic. "We've been out at that research spot." "You literally let us out this morning," I replied, confused. "You've been gone for 2 days. The hell did you do out there?" Comms asked back, confusion taking over the anger and fear in their voice. "Did something happen? Did you break down?" We got back into the garage within minutes, deciding to check in and debrief there, rather than explain over comm systems. 2 higher-ups came in to meet with us, shuffling us into a small lab nearby. They didn't enter though, instead standing at the small observation window and speaking in through the comms system. "Do you have any explanation for being out for 2 days? You were supposed to be back within 12 hours of departure." One of the men said General Pratt, an older man in charge of the US interests up here on base. "We've been very concerned. A rescue mission was being organized when you 3 drove back up." "How?" Leader of the Chinese delegation on the base was looking at us with much less rage than Pratt was. "Look, we were gone for maybe 4 or 5 hours. We got to the designated point, found a cave, went down, stayed for a minute, came back up, now we're here. It's only been a short few hours." Sandra was trying to explain, but none of us were seeing eye to eye. Everything was off, and the concerned expressions on these 2 men's faces were making us all uncomfortable. "What about the suit footage?" "We have GoPros set up in those things, so just check them, you'll see." Sho was almost frantic, the prospect of that missing time almost breaking his brain. We had discussed it on the way in, with none of us able to account for it, all agreeing we were only gone for a few hours. The more we thought about it, the more it made sense though. The dust on the RV couldn't have gotten there in just those few hours, and there weren't any storms recorded in the area at the time we were gone, so where the hell did the time go? We're actually checking suit cameras right now. We don't know what in the world you found down there, but right now we're 7 hours in, and the footage as soon as you get ready to leave down there just becomes still. You have your samples, you're packed up, talking about your discovery. Then before you can turn around to leave, everything gets weird. All 3 of you stop, standing like statues the entire time. We've got a couple of guys skimming the footage, but so far there's no change. The batteries on the cameras likely died during the time you were out, but that's not the biggest problem here," Pratt explained. "That makes no damn sense. We would have run out of our air reserves," I mentioned. "We only have 24 hours in those things, but there was enough for us to make it back. You took your damned helmets off. You didn't use any of your air reserves," Hal leveled, looking each of us in the eyes in turn. "So how the hell are you here right now?" We what?" I stammered out. No, that makes no sense. "We had our helmets on the entire time. None of us was stupid enough to take them off up here. That would be instant death. So what the hell? Look, there's no way any of us would have done that. We're not stupid. Wouldn't be up here if you were," Pratt said, looking into my eyes now, seriousness in his furrowed brow. "But I need to know what the hell would make y'all do that." "We don't know, sir," Sho whispered. Sandra was staring blankly in front of her, and he had his hands crossed in front of him in prayer. There was no telling what was going through their minds, but I know mine was racing with thoughts of the past few hours. I didn't feel any different. There was nothing off about my body. Once we got out of the Atmos suits when we entered, it was refreshing to breathe clean air again. But nothing indicated they were off before then. Look, we're going to keep you three in observation for a bit, just to make sure everything is baseline, Al said, putting his hands up to calm us, despite everyone's dumbfounded quiet state. We'll let you have lab too, though. That way you can study your findings in the meantime. So, are we going to go back to Earth again? Sho asked, fear in his eyes now. He was thinking the same thing we were, having no helmets on, especially down there. All kinds of possible pathogens or biological hazards could have gotten to us. There was no telling what we may have brought back to the base. God, what have we done? I don't know, Al said, a heavy weight in his voice. I do know that your discovery will lead to immense advancements for humanity, though, and you will be a part of history, no matter what. That's not promising, I muttered, looking at the lab around me. Where are my samples? They'll be brought in momentarily. We're cataloging items right now, to be sure, Pratt said, nodding over to a small exchange door on the lab wall. Once it's ready, they'll put it through there. Throw some whiskey in there too, if you can. If I'm trapped here, at least let me drink, I mentioned, hoping for the best. Pratt just nodded, so I'm taking it as a good sign. The two officers walked away then, leaving us to ponder our own mortality for the foreseeable future. I tried to sit in one of the chairs in the corner, but something was making me stay up, only letting me pace nervously as we awaited the samples for study. Sandra was only staring ahead at the wall, while Sho was muttering to himself constantly, going over ways in his head to find out what may be wrong with us, or if there was some way to test. We were in a lab, so not like there weren't resources around, but with the addled state our brains are in, there's no thinking straight like that. Maybe an hour, maybe two. Finally a bin was pushed through the exchange drawer, our sample vials inside, along with a few other items from the RV. Underneath, a bottle of Jack nestled in for all of us to split. I practically dove for it, desperate to see what we had found, what was keeping us in here, and for a drink. Look, I'm well aware at this point I probably have a problem. Least of my worries now, though. Taking a swig straight from the bottle, then offering it to the others who both shook their heads, I was ready to face whatever we were up against. One of the samples went into a test to see exactly what the hell it was, and I took a small drop, putting it right on a slide, and barely getting it in place before pressing my eye to the scope. No fucking way, I said, focusing in on the scope dials to get a more clear look at what was below. Small, red cells formed and slipped around each other in the fluid. Sandra, Sho, I need you to look at this. What is it? Sho asked, coming forward. Sandra didn't respond for a moment, having to shake herself out of a stupor as I tapped her on the shoulder. Look and tell me what you think, I said, making room in front of the microscope for him. He put his eyes to the viewer, adjusting for a moment before gasping, stepping back and almost stumbling into one of the counters. Sandra stepped up to look and had the same response, falling to the ground and scrambling backward. Is that blood? Sho was holding his stomach, a dry heaving starting to work its way up to escape his mouth. Can't blame him, considering that was my first thought as well, when seeing the red cells pulsating and moving past each other. Why is it moving? I don't know. I really don't know. I have some testing to see if it really is blood. Something else in there too, though. Did you see it? I asked, adjusting the slide toward another direction. Look again. Sho peered back into the scope, gasping as he saw the same thing I did only moments ago. A small dark organism moving its way through the red cells and eating them. I don't know if that's what it was actually doing, but just it touching the red cells made it begin to shrink, decaying to nothing before it moved on to another. Could that be in us? He asked, looking from me to Sandra. I noticed now his eyes were bloodshot, a dark red against pale skin. It creeps me out, but I'm chalking it up to lack of sleep. Hell, I probably looked no better. The machine nearby dinged, telling me the first vial's component testing was done. It creeps me out, but I'm chalking it up to lack of sleep. Hell, I probably looked no better. The machine nearby dinged, telling me the first vial's component testing was done. Paper began feeding from the computer nearby, the results of the machine's work. I hesitated, swallowing the lump in my throat before grabbing the paper, ripping it off and closing my eyes as I brought it to my face. You have to look, have to.